how many people have you had a business or a professional relationship with for over 12 years? I have that with Taylor. Taylor came from UVA to be a fellow, and so we had these fellows. We're new, starting at Wonderman, what became Wonderman. I'll just make it simple for you guys. We had about 6 names. We had more names than Taylor was years. But she came and said, well, maybe hiring a fellow would be a good way. Hey, it'd be less expensive, and it would be less risky. We have to manage risk in business. But what would it be to intentionally hire a Christian in this business? And so we did, and she now is, first of all, the longest standing Wonderman employee, correct?
Yeah.
Right? 12 years. Outlasted me. I only made it like almost 9. You know, so now she's at 12. And amazing. So using her skills, and I remember the rest of the office, somebody else who was just, shaky in life a little bit. But they would just say, well, I don't know exactly what she's doing, but she just is a light. This is a light. And then she was understanding. I'm not so sure she didn't seek to understand so well that she didn't know what she wanted to do for a couple of years. And then when she did, but she was so eager to please, so eager to be light. And then we eventually had an evangelism committee with 3 or 4 of us, right? And we were out, that was on the side. Nobody knew that. But if you're watching this now, yeah, we did have one. Because we were trying to love people and be light intentionally. And then now she's a senior director of media strategy, and has employees and leading millions of dollars of media for people. Because she sought to understand, she understood the business so well, she outlasted us all. So that's Taylor, and she's going to come up and tell us about how to seek to understand. Fools find no pleasure in understanding, but delight in airing their own opinions. I just want to tell people the way it is. To answer before listening, that is folly and shame.
These 2 verses are definitely things that I struggle with a lot. I don't know if any of you can relate. I always, my first goal is usually to be the smartest person in the room. I want to prove myself. And so it takes a lot of effort, and it really takes a lot of courage to approach conversations with people, especially in the workplace where there are a lot of opinions with listening and just being silent, kind of like taking things in rather than sharing your own opinion, right? I think that's something that's really hard, especially I often go into situations thinking I know what's right and the other person doesn't, and so it's really hard, I think, to assume that they aren't wrong first and kind of hear people out. So Covey says that seek to first understand starts with empathetic communication. He says you have to build the skills of empathic listening on a base of character that inspires openness and trust. And I think that this is at the core of empathic communication, of seek first to understand, is really kind of embodying, I'm taking the phrase on a base of character to mean that it's not just something you turn on as you're having a conversation. You can't just turn on empathy. It's something that you really have to live out and that you have to practice all the time, because if you go into a conversation with somebody and you just kind of turn that on, the people are going to know that that's just like a listening tactic that you're using, right? So it's something that really starts with starts very much internally, I think, and to me it's a whole lifestyle of how you approach people and how you approach relationships. He says, but consider this. You've spent years learning to read and write, years learning how to speak, but what about listening? What training or education have you had that enables you to listen so that you really deeply understand another human being from that individual's own frame of reference? So I think we probably all had classes on reading and writing and maybe even public speaking, right? We know how to talk and we know how to probably articulate what we're thinking in a really effective way. But I don't know about you guys, but I've never had a class on listening. That's not something anyone's ever taught me how to do. And so Covey argues that listening is something that you that you actually have to practice and you really need to think intentionally about, because it's not something that anyone has ever probably told you that you need to work on, or well, people have probably told you need to work on it, but it wasn't something you like learned in school or something like that. So in that listening, what it does, it enables you to actually understand another human being from their own frame of reference. So Covey talks about autobiographical listening, and where I'm talking to Howard, and everything that he says, I'm interpreting it based on my own experience and my own opinions, rather than my own autobiography, rather than trying to understand where he is coming from and what his lived experience is and why he might be saying the things that he is. And so in order to kind of combat that and not listen just from your own frame of reference, it's something that takes practice, and it takes, like, I think, a lot of thought and intentionality. And I think the other thing that that is really important about thinking about another person's own frame of reference is giving them psychological air. Is that every human being wants to be affirmed and validated and understood, and that he calls the act of doing that for people, giving them psychological air. It's giving them what they need to breathe, what they need to feel free and feel safe. For them to actually eventually listen to you and have a good conversation, they have to feel safe. So you have to make them feel affirmed. You're not just making them feel affirmed, but you have to want them to feel affirmed, and like it has to be something that you like genuinely desire for them. Yeah, I mean, I've definitely had many times where I don't think I was practicing empathy, and it never ends well. It always ends with the other person, either like shutting down, I think, or just it never ends up in a win-win situation. That's for sure. So. Brene Brown says, in order to empathize with someone's experience, you must be willing to believe them as they see it and not how you imagine their experience to be. So I think that in order to exercise empathy in your relationships, you really have to humble yourself a lot. You have to humble yourself. You have to have courage to kind of enter into somebody else's story and what they're saying. And it requires you to be pretty vulnerable, I think, with people sometimes. So I like this quote because I think it's really easy when somebody's telling you something, especially if it's something that maybe you thought you knew the context to. Like, I deal with this with employees a lot. They come to me and they tell me that someone else has like did something to make their job harder or something. And I'm like, well, I know that person can be a little bit like hard to deal with, so this employee I'm talking to is probably right. So I go to talk to the other employee, but then you hear the other employee's story and you're like, okay, well, I've got two like stories that seem pretty valid or something. And so but I think it's just being willing to like listen to both sides of a story. For example, like in the workplace, can help you kind of get down to the truth of what's happening, and being willing to like believe everybody as they're saying that they see the experience, because however they have experienced something and their perception is their reality, right? Like they're not. If somebody's saying that someone hurt their feelings or something, like they really were hurt by it, but I think that it just takes a lot of humility, I think, to enter into those conversations and be willing to listen to people and hear out the full story of what they're saying. So Covey also talks about ethos, pathos, and logos. And so this is really the way that you kind of get to, I'd say, those win-win or no deal outcomes. So ethos is what we've kind of been talking about in terms of building up your credibility, right? If empathy is something that you're really living out in the day-to-day, it's something that you're doing everywhere. It's your lifestyle, and that helps build your reputation among people. And so when people know that they can trust you and they know that you're going to be somebody that makes them feel safe, then they're going to start opening up to you and share their emotions behind what their needs are to you. So somebody's coming to you with something that they want or need, and you ask the right questions to kind of get behind whatever's going on there, and you learn more about them. And by understanding the emotions behind something, then you can come to an even more logical conclusion than maybe you started out thinking that you were going to bring to the table. And so I think that by building up your credibility, tapping into emotions, that actually helps you make even more rational and logical decisions. And so I like how like all three of these things can kind of come together with a seek first, understand mentality. And so this is a more practical view of just how to practice empathic listening. And these are development stages that build on each other. So at the top is like kind of like the bare minimum, like first grade level of empathic listening. So mimic content would be just restating exactly what somebody said to you. Rephrasing content would be somebody saying, I think the example in the book is like, school is for the birds, Dad, or something like that. And then you would rephrase that content by being like, you're not liking school very much. Reflecting feeling would be, you feel frustrated and sad that you have to go to school every day. And then rephrasing content and reflecting feeling is just combining all of those things together to sort of show the other person that you're like actually taking in and like processing what they're saying. You're not just repeating it back to them. You're actually trying to determine what it is that what they're saying to you. But then you're also asking them to confirm what you think they're feeling in that too. And that helps you just uncover the layers of what somebody's problem is that they're bringing to you, or whatever you're talking to them about. The most simple way to do this would be to just ask, tell me more about that. You can kind of dig into a lot of things just by, keep asking why. Kind of like the Simon Sinek thing, when you're kind of defining your why. It's like you keep peeling back the layers, you keep asking why, and you can get down a lot deeper in your relationship with somebody. The great Tony Bennett. So Tony Bennett's the coach of UVA basketball, and in 2018, UVA made history by being the first number 1 seed to lose to a 16 seed, and it was one of the saddest days of my life. But 2019 was a redemption year, and they came back to make history again by winning the national championship. Tony Bennett, in an interview, said this. I think he said this in the middle of the 2019 tournament. If you learn to use it right, the adversity will buy you a ticket to a place you couldn't have gone any other way. And I really like this quote because I think it kind of exemplifies just how I think it's the courage that it takes to like approach a situation that's difficult and that seems really daunting, especially in relationships. I mean, I think having to have difficult conversations with people is one of the scariest things to me to have to do. And so I think when I think about Tony Bennett and the Who's, I like to think that based on this quote, like, I don't think he went to his team and was like, you guys did this wrong and this wrong and this wrong and this wrong, and then this is how we're going to do this season. Like, I think he probably went to his players and his coaches and was like, how did you guys experience this situation? What do you guys think we need to change? Kind of like unraveled the layers there to try to get to a collaborative way forward that led to a great next season. So going back into into how much kind of security it takes for you to, and I think it takes a lot of confidence in yourself as well to kind of enter into these conversations. So Covey says, it takes a great deal of security to go into a deep listening experience because you open yourself up to be influenced. You become vulnerable. It's a paradox in a sense because in order to have influence, you have to be influenced. And I think that's probably one of the scariest things about opening yourself up to what someone else is saying, is because you might have some deeply rooted opinions or thoughts about something, but if you're really listening to somebody, like, they can potentially influence you, and they probably will. They'll probably change your mind about something. And that takes, again, I know I keep saying humility, but like, that just takes a lot of humility to have your mind changed like that. And I think this also leads into the second part of seek first to understand, which is then be understood. And I think I want to make sure that we talk about then be understood, because I think that's a really important part of this whole process, is you came into the conversation with needs as well. You as much as the other person wants to be affirmed and understood, you also have that need, because we all do. And so I think the vulnerable part is that, and why it takes a lot of security is because that need that you have might not be fully met in that conversation. But I think as you kind of approach with empathic listening and kind of start doing the kind of rephrasing content and restating feelings, I think you can kind of guide the conversation toward what you came into it wanting to talk about too. I think it's probably the best way to kind of get kind of like circle around to like whatever you also wanted to bring into the conversation. It's like the example in the book, the guy is having the conversation with his son, and eventually the son's like, "What do you think, Dad?" Because he also felt safe enough to be vulnerable and maybe have his own perspective changed. So I think it kind of helps flip the script a little bit as you enter into the conversation. And the other person who probably also came in not wanting to be influenced, now all of a sudden they feel safe enough that they can be. I think it's important to keep in mind this is not a passive thing. This is a very active thing that you're doing, and it does require, like, you gotta ask the right questions. You definitely do. Yeah. Cool. Okay, so now moving into how we see this in the life of Jesus. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. So this is another Crawford Loritz quote. The greatest thing a leader brings to the table is a dependence on God. So I don't think any of this, I think people can be really good at what we've just been talking about, independent of dependence on God. Like I think they could possibly like be good at it, but I think if you really want to like do this really well, I don't know if there's any other way that you can have the confidence and the security if you don't have a dependence on God, because of the kind of like vulnerability that you're entering into. So I think to be a really great leader, if you're not, fully dependent on God, you don't really have that stability underneath you to enter into this and like really practice it really well and to seek win-win deals, right?
Ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be open to you. For everyone who asks receives. The one who seeks finds. And to the one who knocks, the door will be opened.
So I think as we're seeking to have empathy with others, I think it's just important to keep in mind that we have to keep going back to Jesus for what we need, because that's going to give us the power and like I just said, like that's going to give us what we need to be able to have the strength to like do this every day and enter into a relationship in a more meaningful way. And God says that if we ask Him for help and we ask Him, to enter into our relationships with us, like He's going to open the door and He's going to give us what we need to keep moving forward in that.
Which of you, if your son asks for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will give him a snake? If then, though you are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask Him?
Yeah, so think that we can be really confident in Christ to keep bringing goodness into our lives, even when it's hard to see past whatever is happening in the moment, and even on like a bad day, right, where you have a bad conversation with a trucker guy, like or like worse things. You go back to the Lord and you ask Him for what you need, and He's gonna provide that in the end. So I think that just gives, that's very reassuring to me that I can keep having courage to enter into things that are difficult, and keep asking God for help.
So these verses, okay, we read them. These are what we're supposed to do to God. We like that for that. He says, seek. He says, ask, seek, knock, and it will be given to you. But how? So we think about the example you were giving and then apply that in business. How can seeking in a contract, Michael, how can seeking what somebody else wants actually help you understand the will of God better? Because admitting that you wish you would have sought deeper, you weren't saying, I wish I'd have sought deeper so she wouldn't follow the will of God. You want to seek deeper so she would. So you see the play, you see we can't, if we know who we are, we can seek to understand this unknown client and see what God's doing. We can seek, when we're interviewing, to seek to really understand what a business is doing. Either direction, a new employee or at a new business. How can seeking to understand, knocking, and asking, seeking, and knocking with another human help you understand the will of God? That's what's on the table. Because there's a chance we over-spiritualize it. It's true. It's true for God. But how can going deeper with a person this way help you understand the will of God better? Yeah, and it's not, and not just in my prayer, right? It's not just in help me see Wade better, help me see him better, help me see him better. I think what God's saying, ask Wade. Ask Wade what he wants. You've got my word. I'm with you. You're dependent on me. You're not going to lose. What he says isn't going to hurt you. What he says isn't going to persuade you unless you got it wrong. And if you got it wrong, you're now going to know it better. I never saw him right. Well, 16-year-olds, I've raised 3 of them. They think about something different every day. You got to start where they are. That's why Jesus asked them. As Haley said it exactly right. He knew. He still said, they're still yelling out, Son of Man, have mercy on us. And he says, what do you want me to do for you? He knows. We want to see. But so if I declare, even if you know them declaring it, then help keeps them on the path, which is a little different subject. But if we're really willing to seek deeply the need of the person we're talking to, you weren't about to lead her off of God's will. But what you're saying your regret is I didn't keep asking, seeking through her so that I could present my answer in a relative way or back off and not speak for 2 weeks.
Yeah, I think.
So how empathetic was that? I asked you one way, you flipped it to be somebody you want to do that for you. Right? You want somebody to keep asking, keep asking. So this week's way to work is going to be just this simple. It's going to be, and that's what you're saying, Joel. If I keep asking, I'll see it. I'll see what they need. Just keep asking. Tell me more about that. Now look, if it's already about, the car, tell me more about your need for a car. So you can put something in it, but you can't say, I said this in another group, and the guy was an attorney who cross-examines people. He corrected me. But you really can't say, tell me more about that too much. In fact, every time you've asked it one more time, it's opened up. Now, if they're already annoyed by it, that's different. But if you really can't say, tell me about your need, you got to say it a different way, Hurston. You've already asked it 3 times. You're going to ask it one more way. Tell me more about that. It opens everything up. And then, if they're asking for a fish, if you really invested in them that way and you care about them that way, and they're asking for a fish, you're not about to give them a stone. And if they ask for a stone, which is where your starting example was, Cannon, they're asking for a stone. You're saying, I want to do the wrong thing. I want to do the wrong thing. They're asking for a stone. You can understand how to give them a fish. Because now I understand their motivation. I'm taking them down. Now let's say, if you eat stones for 8 days, how's that going to work for you? And you keep eating stones. How's that going to work out? And the stuff y'all are doing is just as silly as that. The stuff, even in business, what they really need can get what they're really trying to do. Just keep asking, just keep asking. So in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you. For this sums up the law and the prophets. who just asked Canaan a question and he flipped it back around to what he wants to have done to him. I want somebody to ask me so many questions that I get to the end of myself. And so in love, let's ask people questions. Let's ask them one more time. Tell me more about that, because that's what Jesus does for us. Lord, you're so good to us. Thank you for Taylor and her life that's a witness to many, an encouragement to many. She seeks to understand many. So thank you for the blessing of hearing her today. And thank you, Lord, that you seek to understand us, mostly for our own benefit, because you know us better than you know ourselves. But you're saying, bring me what you want. Wrestle with what you need. Keep asking, keep seeking, keep knocking. And let's keep helping others do the same. We pray in your name, Jesus. Amen. Great job, Taylor.
Thanks.
Good job.